Good to go. Hi everyone, thanks for joining in and watching us today. I'm excited to have Abigail Mann joining us. Abigail is a comedy writer living in London, surviving on a diet of 3-shot coffee, bourbons, and vegetarian sausage rolls. She was born and brought up in Norfolk, England, which she say is blame for her sardonic humour that runs through her novels. And Abigail was the runner-up to the 2019 Comedy Woman in Print Award for The Lonely Theatre, which was her first novel. Have you got it there to show us?
I do.
And her second novel is Sister Surprise. And I have to say that I've recently read Sister Surprise and really enjoyed it. It was really great. Abigail takes inspiration from unconventional cross-sections of modern society and the impact this has on identity and the relationships we create. She wrote her first novel after teaching literature for a number of years and whilst working in the fast-paced co-working spaces of East London. Nowadays, she writes anywhere with a desk and access to coffee and aided by noise-cancelling headphones and the sound of a stormy sea. So thanks so much for Abigail for joining us. Just wondering if you want to start off by telling us a little bit more about your books.
Yeah, sure. And thanks so much for having me. It's really nice to be here. And yeah, I feel like I'm being on brand today with my noise cancelling headphones on. Yeah, so my books, I suppose I describe them as comedies, but I mean, I think you as members of the club will probably notice that when you go into libraries or bookshops, there isn't usually like a comedy section for fiction. There's a huge humor section usually for books, but they're usually like biographies of comedians and things like that. So when I started, I wanted to sort of get to the end of writing a manuscript. I wasn't intending to write something that was comic. I initially wanted to do historical fiction.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, I love historical fiction. I'm a huge fan of historical fiction. So I wanted to write one of those, but I just kept accidentally putting humor in it, and it wasn't quite fitting the genre. So I changed tack. So the Lonely Fajita was a book that came out of having just lived in London when I left university, and I was training to become a teacher in London as well. And I so often saw sort of people who moved to big cities for a short period of time to try and sort of find their feet, but actually it being quite a lonely experience, not really having a community to fit in. And also it being quite isolating if you're an older person living in a very busy city, because I don't know, I have visited sort of Sydney as a big city in Australia, but in London I think it is quite inaccessible. It's very fast paced. People don't have much patience. So I wanted to find sort of a younger person and an older person who are kind of dealing with the same issues of isolation, and literally throw them together so they become housemates in the Lonely Fajita as a way to combat loneliness, but also so that my protagonist Alyssa can save some money on rent. So that's kind of where that first book was born out of.
And I'm wondering, do you have a comedy background?
Not in an official sense. I would probably say that I cut my teeth on perhaps not comedy necessarily, but the idea of performance and having to engage an audience when I was a teacher. I was teaching teenagers, so age 11 to 18, and every teacher kind of like develops their own tactic for getting the young people on board. And my tactic was, well, if I can get them on board by making them laugh and making them sort of find an interest in what can often be quite like inaccessible topics, teaching Dickens to 15-year-olds who are just not interested. I found it helped strike a chord of rapport between us. And so I think it's a pretty tough crowd. I think teenagers in a city's I can't think of an audience who would be more intimidating to stand in front of. So perhaps it was a baptism of fire, so to speak, and that's where I kind of developed a bit of a funny bone.
Yeah. And your second book, The Sister Surprise, that's the one I said before that I read, and it's like the background of the book is DNA testing. Have you? I was wondering, have you done a DNA test yourself?
Yeah, actually, this is such good timing because, yeah, as you said, the Sister Surprise is about Ava, she's down here on the cover, and she's a young journalist who takes a DNA test to follow a story that she's writing up for work, and discovers that she has this half sister in Scotland that she didn't know anything about, and if anyone's sort of like done a DNA test, and I've done one of the ancestry ones, and they give you sort of quite a specific geographical location if other members of your family have also taken the test and have like ticked opt in to having their results shared. So I did one of them when I was researching. Asked my mum beforehand if it was anything dodgy would be thrown up, and she said no. So I did do one, and they are really specific with where your results come from. So when they come through into your inbox, you kind of see this map, and the bits that are shaded in where they can trace ancestry back to. And weirdly enough, it did come back for me as 25% Scottish, which I didn't have any idea about. So, and that was after I decided to set the book in Scotland. So I was like, oh, this is a coincidence. But the other reason is more of a practical one, I think, with the DNA testing, is that I needed Ava, who is the protagonist in Sister Surprise, to discover a half sister in a place that has a very low population, so that she could feasibly go there and and find out who her sister might be. So in the UK, the most rural and the least populated space is the Scottish Highlands. I think one of the villages there has like less than 80 people in it, and Kilrock has, I think, 300 or less. So I put Ava's half sister up there.
So that was the name of a real town?
No, I made that one up. I do tend to sort of take inspiration from real places, but then I have to manipulate details, one to sort of suit the plot, but also you just don't want to offend anyone. So usually take 2 or 3 places and then merge all of the details together, and then that becomes the place. So that was Kilrock, and I was just trying to find names that sounded sort of Scottish enough. So I went through lots of variations of Scottish sounding names before settling on that one.
Yeah, and we've got quite a few people watching, which is great. Just reminding people watching, if you've got any questions for Abigail, please type them in comments and I'll be able to read them out to her. We do have a couple of questions. Both Sarah Joy and Wendy are wondering if you still are teaching or have another day job beside your writing.
Sure. So in short, there are many other side jobs that come into the mix as and when. So I do still teach sometimes, and I teach adults mainly now, or sort of teenagers, but specifically creative writing. So I do workshops and ordinarily would go into schools, but not at the moment. Everything's online, and do workshops there to do with creative writing, but my angle always tends to be a bit more like just practical steps into it. I find that a lot of creative writing workshops and courses can be quite abstract, and I like to sort of go in with lots of tasks and prompts, and so I do that sometimes. That's what I've got one coming up in a few months' time, and so I do that. But I also do some education work with young people who from low-income backgrounds in the UK, and offering sort of free tuition for those students in the wake of like the lockdowns that we've had, as you guys have as well. There's lots of kids who have missed out, so that's another thing that I do. And I also write for magazines. I write lots of short stories for publication as well. So I have like different hats that I put on every now and then.
Certainly very busy.
Yes, exactly.
So did you do some training yourself for preparing yourself for writing your novel?
I did study creative writing at university as part of my modules. I did English literature with creative writing, but I didn't really get on with creative writing when I was sort of 18, 19, 20. I don't know about you, Jackie, but when I was that age, I especially if you're a big reader as a child, you go in thinking, well, I should know how to do this because I've read so much, and the idea of studying it was quite strange. And I mean, obviously, when then it didn't, I was writing stuff, and it wasn't like instantly fantastic. I just lost a lot of faith, and it switched me off for quite a few years. So it wasn't until I became a teacher, and I was running a creative writing club at school, and I was doing a lot of the creative writing resources for the school, that I actually started doing the tasks that I was setting the students myself. And that's when it I was like, when the bell would go, and I'd be like, okay, right, I just want all these kids to leave now because I want to continue writing. So it wasn't really until then that it came back again. But I mean, I'm looking at my bookshelf now, and there are a lot of books about writing that I have tried to sort of glean information from. And I know a lot of authors that when they finish a book and it's been published and you have a little break, that they'll go back to those books because you just think, I've got to learn how to do it again. I don't know. Every book is a different beast, and so I always seem to be reaching for books again that perhaps I can take something different from.
And can you tell us a little bit about your publishing journey, like how hard or easy it was for you to get that first book published?
Yeah, sure. So so The Lonely Fajita was the first manuscript that I finished, and then was also the first book that was published. And I think I try and do that thing where I'm like, there's a certain element, I think, of really good timing that came into it, and it was like the right book at the right time. So I wrote The Lonely Fajita when I had left teaching for a small period. I was moving cities, and so I gave myself a deadline of finishing this manuscript, because like, at least I can say I have tried doing it. And as I mentioned, I tried writing a historical novel that went badly. I spent about a year and a half planning it meticulously, using flashcards. I read so many historical novels at that time, but then when it just came to actually writing it, because it was quite a dark subject matter, I just became quite like miserable. I was the people I was living with at the time said that I was a bit of I wasn't particularly great company, because I'd come downstairs and people would say, how has the writing gone? And I'd just kind of glower and twitch. So when I switched, I asked for some friends and my parents, like, if you could say what was like my voice, what's my genre I should write in. And they said something funny. So I switched completely, scrapped everything, and replanned a book in about 5 or 6 weeks, and then just wrote until I'd got to the end. But it also aligned with the opening of the Comedy Women in Print Prize. So I was using that deadline to get the book into the prize. And that really helped. I think if I hadn't had that deadline, I think I'd still be trying to plow through the manuscript now. So when that got longlisted, the whole thing just accelerated a lot. And then I found an agent and a publisher all within about 6 months of each other. So in the grand scheme of things, I think it is a short period of time. But I think those 10 years before of picking up the practice, putting it down again, teaching it to other people, coming back to it, led up to that point, which then became quite quick after, accelerated quite quickly after that.
Yeah, well, and it certainly sounds like a huge change from historical fiction that sounds a little bit dreary and maybe sad, and to a comedy. Yeah.
And exactly, yeah. And I mean, I did a 18th century studies as I have like a master's in 18th century studies, and so I mean there isn't much I couldn't tell you about breaches in the Georgian period. Men's clothing for some reason was my niche. I don't know if like the lake scene and Pride and Prejudice, watching that as a young teenager, had anything to do with it, but somehow that became my specialism. But perhaps I'll go back to it one day, but maybe comedy historical.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, if you would go back to historical fiction. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely would. Maybe maybe a couple years down the line. There's so much research involved in it that I'd want to, do it justice.
And Kelly wonders, what is your favourite part of being a writer?
That's a really good question. It's, I think as a job, when the days that I have that are just for writing, it's such an abstract and really amazing thing to be able to just sort of put my headphones on and I just live in the world of these characters for 9-10 hours a day, and having that time to sort of really sort of knuckle down and focus, and that's fantastic. That's, I think, the best thing on the day-to-day about being an author. But the other thing I think is knowing that sort of either my sense of humor or the story that I was trying to tell, or sometimes the quite sensitive subject matter that I've tried to communicate in a way that is perhaps varies between being serious and silly. It hits a chord with someone else. If those times where you get like little messages or emails with a shared experience. I have had so many people from the Sister Surprise in particular sharing stories of family members that they have discovered. And it actually being a positive experience for them. Whereas I think a lot of the books that I've read before, it had been either a crime or a thriller and someone dies, or quite negative. So knowing that you've kind of like made a connection with someone you've never met before is definitely one of the best things. And also justifiably buying stationery. I think that is for sure a good thing. I'll just, there's just endless. I have so many pens and I can justify it entirely. So that's also a positive.
No, that sounds great. Belinda wonders if you have a favourite character to write.
Yeah, definitely. There's been one in every book so far, a type of character. It's never the protagonist, because they're the kind of like the vessel through which the story is told. And then I always have a character in books who's usually quite doesn't really listen to rules, quite smarmy, quite posh and male. And I usually I know in my head it's like, Hugh Grant in his 20s is this kind of person, and I have met quite a few of them. So usually there's characters like that. Max in Sister Surprise is that kind of character. And then there's a character called Adam in Lonely Fajita. And in my book that I'm writing at the moment, there's a character called Lawrence, who is just so deliciously, horribly smarmy that it gives my protagonist a chance to sort of put them in their place. And that kind of interaction is I just absolutely love writing that kind of thing. So those are my favorite kind of characters to write.
And you said you're currently writing another book. Are you able to tell us anything about that?
So it's called The Wedding Crasher, and behind my Zoom screen I have the manuscript open, and it's currently covered in a lot of track changes and red inserts. I haven't actually practiced the elevator pitch for this, so if it's a bit rambling, I apologise. But it's a story of Poppy, who has recently separated from her husband. She's approaching 30 and got married when she was very young, around 21, 22. Just as her friends are getting engaged, she's breaking up. And so her best friend is a wedding planner and is doing the wedding of a very sort of high society family on an island off of the south coast of England. And the photographer has bailed on them. So she asks Poppy if she would like to come and help her out at this very exclusive wedding location, which is the last place that she wants to be, having recently separated. And she recognizes the groom. So I'll leave it there.
Okay. And is that sort of the same sort of genre as the others, a bit of comedy and...
Yeah, this one, I would say that with the first two, I always describe them as contemporary comedies. This one, I would say, is more of a romantic comedy.
Okay.
It's something that I've like actively tried to push against, I think, in the past, but for this one, I just really lent into it, and I have really enjoyed sort of like writing the romance sort of side of things. It's very complicated romance, but but that's been I'd say it's more of a romantic comedy. But if you're gonna put a percentage on the rom versus com, I'd say it's like a 30% rom and a 70% com.
That sounds like it's another good one coming up. So would you expect that to be out next year, or?
Yeah, so that one is due to come out on March the 17th in ebook and June the 24th in paperback.
Okay,
next
so
year.
That's not too far away then.
Not too far, but far enough. I mean, I've still got quite a few edits to do on it, but it'll be ready. It'll be ready.
And Wendy says the covers of your books all look very catchy and fitting. She's wondering if you were involved in designing any, and also like naming the books.
With my first, the Lonely Fajita, so that is a title that I submitted the manuscript in with when it was the Comedy Win in Print Awards. My brother actually came up with the title because I was at his house and I needed to put something in the title, but I hadn't thought of anything. He said it as a joke, and he was like, "Well, even if they end up changing it, at least it'll catch someone's eye." I mean, joke's on him because it stayed. And then the cover itself, we had this idea of sort of wrapping Alyssa up so that she looks like a little fajita. And then so that stuck. Sister Surprise was a title that we knew we wanted the word sister in it, but beyond that, my publisher chose the title for, but we just kept sister in. And my requirement for this was that it must have chickens on the front. And we managed to get some in, and there's one on the spine as well. So I was very pleased with that.
With the chickens,
And then the next one, who knows? I've seen some rough ideas. Again, the publisher came up with the title for that one, and we only came up with the one, and we were like, that completely fits, so let's stick with it.
MJ and Sarah Joy, they've both mentioned, what sort of books do you like reading? MJ's wondering if you've got any favourite historical fiction books, maybe. And I'm wondering if there's anything you might have read lately that you want to recommend to us.
Yeah, absolutely. So with historical fiction, there's a book called Longbourn. I believe the author is Joe Baker. I could be wrong. It is the account of Pride and Prejudice, but from the perspective of the servants. And I really enjoyed that one. It's a bit more sort of gritty and raw in the servants from the Bingley household, and then the Darcy household and the Bennet household are all sort of talking with each other. So that's a really good one. I also really enjoyed The Doll Factory by Elizabeth McNeill. That's a Victorian set story and follows the Great Exhibition in Crystal Palace, and a taxidermist who's trying to get his wares into it, but they're a bit too weird for the Great Exhibition. and it was also to do like the pre-Raphaelite painters, and that's just like that's a really, really good one. And then in terms of contemporary books I've read recently, I finished 8 Perfect Hours by Leah Lewis recently. This is a proof, so it's not got the title in the front, but it's on the side. 8 Perfect Hours. It's like your traditional rom-com, really sort of heady and romantic, but also I particularly like narratives where there is humor in it, and it's quite dark. Like it's sometimes people speak like they do in my life anyway, where it's a bit more sort of down to earth. So I really enjoyed that one. And also The Reading List by Sarah Anisha Adams. This is a story of a girl called Alicia who's working in her local library really reluctantly. It's a summer job, and that's the reason she's doing it. But when a older man called Mukesh comes into the library to try and find books that were on a reading list that his recently departed wife had left behind, he's trying to kind of get these books to connect with her again, and they end up forming this unlikely friendship. So that's a good one. And then sometimes, I don't know about you, but sometimes when I get into bed and I just don't have the stamina for necessarily a book, you know. I kind of dip into poetry sometimes. In this collection, Everything's Going to Be All Right, are all sort of it's called Poems for When You Really Need Them, and they're all sort of different themes like joy and hope and motivation and things like that. So there are some really good ones in there, mixture of older poems and new ones.
And do you like writing a bit of poetry yourself?
I used to a bit, and I used to make candles, and sell them at fairs. And I had an idea to sort of write poems that matched the scent of the candles. So I did do it a little then. I haven't done it recently. I have a very good friend, Emily Harrison, who's a fantastic poet. And every time I read one of her poems, I'm like, yeah, I'll stick to books.
Well, thanks for those recommendations. Looked like some good ones there to add to our ever-growing lists.
Yeah, I need to look at the list if anyone is putting recommendations down as well, because I've just got to the end of my proof pile, so I'm on to unlimited reading list. So I'll look up everyone else's recommendations too.
Yeah. And I'm wondering if you had always wanted to be a writer.
No. When I was, I suppose it's because I didn't see it as a job that was within my remit at all. I grew up with not a huge amount of books in the house. We always went to the library. You couldn't really afford to have that many books in the house. I always enjoyed writing a lot, and sort of English teachers would push me towards you know, those like clubs and schemes for keen writers. But it's I didn't have the faintest idea how you would make that a job. I thought it was this sort of, it was almost like being like a philosopher or a politician. Like how do you get into that? It's so abstract. So I wanted to be a vet for a really long time. And then I went to be a teacher, and I think that was maybe now in hindsight, maybe that was my like sidestep into working with words in a little bit more of a direct way. But it wasn't until I was maybe 20, 24 that I thought, well, I'm gonna give it a proper go, because I just didn't have the confidence before then, to be honest. It took a lot of baby steps to get to the point where I was like, I'm gonna give it a go and tell people that that's what I'm doing, so that I'm accountable to trying, and without knowing whether I was gonna make it or not.
And what did those people say when you told them?
A lot of people weren't surprised, which I found quite surprising. Perhaps other people noticed it before I did, that writing was something that I wanted to sort of dedicate to myself to in a bit more serious way. So I told my students at school as well. I had a couple of amazing groups of incredibly sort of talented English students who I thought it was important to tell them, one, that I was leaving the school, but also why I was leaving. And that I didn't know if it was going to be a success or not, but I wanted to try, because I just thought it was important to let them know that. Because a lot of young people are so worried about sort of making a choice about what they're going to do or their career, and then that just being something they have to stick with forever. So I did tell them, and they thought it was a really cool idea. Some of them have since found me on social media, and some of them have read my books, which is very sweet. One of them has read my books though, and did put quite a negative review on Instagram. So I was just like, well, if only I'd known that when I was marking your papers. But most of them have been absolutely lovely and very supportive.
Yeah, because I'd say that your books would appeal to young adults as well.
Yeah, I would definitely say so. But then again, I've had some very readers that I wouldn't have expected. My dad is a big advocate for for my books and is an accountant, and he literally manhandles copies of my book into his clients' hands. And I've had men in their like 50s and 60s who only ever read like sports biographies say that they've enjoyed them too. So unexpected, but I'm happy for the readers wherever they come from.
Yeah. I'm not surprised though that it does appeal to a wide range of people. I'm wondering how much research you've had to do for your books.
When it comes to when I was writing the Lonely Cohesive, because it's about a scheme for live-in companions for the elderly. I did a bit of research into whether schemes like that exist, and there are a couple of schemes that do exactly that. So I was looking into the details of that. I suppose I do my research in a bit of a meandering way for that book as well. I spent a lot of time on looking up Gumtree adverts.
Okay.
So like people who were advertising for like musicians who needed cheap rent to move in with their grandma, who had this like amazing flat overlooking St Paul's Cathedral in London. And I was just like, I wish I'd not given up clarinet when I was 11 years old. But yeah, looking at a lot of Gumtree adverts. I look at Reddit a lot, which I know is quite can be quite an interesting area of the internet for negative reasons, but also there's a great series on Reddit called Am I the Arsehole? Which where people sort of like describe a conflict they're having with someone in their life, and whether and what they should do about it, and people feed in. I find that so stimulating for research. But with the Sister Surprise, I did go up to Scotland on the Caledonian sleeper train, which is what Ava does, and spent some time. I booked Airbnbs that on purpose that had really odd descriptions in the advertisement. So one was like, you can stay, but you have to come in and help feed the animals in the morning. We start at 7. And so I was like, booked.
And what animals did they have that you had to feed at 7 in the morning?
Sheep. There were some fantastic black-nosed sheep that have really curly hair that were the inspiration for sort of Miranda and the other sheep in the book. Some Highland cows, or they say Highly cows up in Scotland that needed feeding as well, and some Orkney pigs that were just completely mad and just ran laps around the farm, and the chickens, of course. So I definitely take research as like what kind of people can I meet, and the more strange the better.
That must have been a great side to your research.
Yeah, it was just before the pandemic as well, so when we went up there, it was about a week before we went into lockdown. When everyone sort of thought that it wasn't gonna reach us, but it did, as it did everywhere. So I was very lucky to have got that trip in when I did. And I also spent a lot of time on Google Maps, I'll add, just walking down streets.
Okay.
Do that a lot.
Yeah. And did you meet anyone who found a surprise person in their family through a DNA research?
Yeah, a couple of people. Someone who had been contacted by a half sister. They live over here. They're American, and they were contacted by a half sister still in the States, whose father had been a little promiscuous in the 70s, and had a secret child that he knew about, which they discovered when they were clearing his house out and found some letters. He knew about this other child and had never mentioned anything to the family. Also someone within sort of my family who had two siblings in a different country that they didn't know existed. And people who contact me on Instagram as well. One person who was I think working on the checkouts at a supermarket, and someone came to their checkout and said, I think you're my sister," and then that
so
turned
that
out
was
to
a little
be,
bit like similar to your book then, of someone
yeah,
suddenly turning up. And
these have all come out afterwards. Beforehand, it was a radio show I was listening to where there are so many people who find sort of either a parent or a sibling who's not who they didn't know about, or a sibling who they thought was a full sibling and is not. It's one in every 8 or 9 people who sort of take a DNA test on one of these home sites where they'll find something out like that, which is a huge percentage. So yeah, I think it's more frequent than I thought, possibly.
Yeah. Well, I've recently sent mine. I haven't got my results back, but I sent mine away. But I'm not expecting any surprises. But
do you know much about where you're like geographically and stuff, where your family are from?
yeah, we've got a family tree and that, so a lot from Scotland and England and Germany as well. So it'll be interesting to see if any other countries come up.
Yeah, well, you never know. We might end up being sort of third or fourth cousins. If you've got the Scottish like I had.
Yeah. MJ's got a good question. She says, you're a Londoner and it appears the city plays a part in your books. She wonders if you've got any hidden gems that you would suggest visitors to London add to their list.
Oh, that's a really good question. Yeah, so recently, actually, I was going for a walk around London, and the places to go at the weekends are the places where Londoners don't go. So the city of London itself, so all around the Bank of England, is completely dead on the Saturdays and Sundays because the bankers aren't there. So you get these sort of like beautiful sort of Georgian and Victorian sort of neighborhoods where no one is. So I definitely recommend going around sort of Bank in the city of London on weekends, and the courts of law, so the Royal Courts of Justice, the buildings around there, the walkways through them and the little gardens are all open to the public, and there's no one there on Saturdays and Sundays. But I'd also say that the South Bank Centre is my favorite place to go. I tend to, these are all places that usually have pretty good Wi-Fi, and also are free to go in and linger. So the South Bank Centre has loads of free arts and music on that you could just wander in and out of. Did make the mistake of trying to write there a couple of months ago whilst there was a drumming circle on. Bad idea, not great for concentration.
I can imagine,
and what else? Favorite places? Perhaps going a little further afield as well. Greenwich Park. You can get the boat from where the London Eye is, and then the boat goes down the Thames, drops you off in Greenwich, and there's like the Naval College there is like this beautiful park and buildings, and they have like food markets and things. So yeah, those are some highlights. I could go on, but I'll stop there.
No, thanks for that, and I hope that it won't be too long and we will be able to come and visit some of those places. And I think, did you mention to me before you have visited Australia before?
Yeah, so I have some family out in Queensland.
Okay.
They live, it's kind of like, whenever I describe it, it's like that, that place and then that place, and then you go for about 70 more miles. And so it's near, they live near Mackay in this tiny place called Eaton.
Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, it's pretty rural, and their road kind of stops. It's just a dirt road, and then it's just outback. So I spent about 6 weeks over there in Sydney, and then also Cairns. So when I was a smaller, 10 or 11. But yeah, sadly, my aunt who emigrated there when she was 17, she died a few years ago. So I've just got a couple of cousins left over there now. But yeah, they always put pictures up on Facebook, and I'm like, I don't understand how you've not been bitten by a snake yet. Because they'll be like them just like holding various dangerous animals that they found around their house.
And could you tell us what advice you'd give to a new writer?
Yes. So the thing that I think was made the biggest mindset shift when I was starting out was the only thing that gets book written is sitting down and writing a book. And you can do so many courses and read so many books about writing, but at the end of the day, you just got to sit down and do it. And you can't edit a blank page. So even if you've got 20 minutes per day where it's time when you're not being interrupted, or you need to lock the door, you can do 200 words in 20 minutes. And if you do that every day, you'll have the full book written by a year is all you need. So yeah, you don't need big swathes of time, just tiny bits of time. Just sit down, put a timer on, get some headphones, and go for it.
Thanks for that advice. I'm wondering if you have a favourite writing snack or drink.
Coffee, always. I have a holy trinity of snacks: grapes, dolly mixture, Thai sweet chili sensation crisps. I don't know if you have them over there, but they are so good. So kind of like spicy savoury, some fruit, because in my head it cancels out the rest, and then something like sugar kick for that 3 to 4 p.m. slump hour to get through.
And do you celebrate when you finish your book?
Yeah, I have a really long sleep. The book is finished so many times, so when I get to the end of a draft, first draft, that's like the big just breathe out moment. And then it's finished again when you do the structural edits, and then it's finished again when you do the copy edits. So yeah, I usually celebrate by doing something really mundane, like binge watching Married at First Sight, and just not looking at a screen.
Yeah,
it's really lame, isn't it? But there we go. Maybe it's because this has mainly happened during the 2 years that we've had this pandemic. But I don't see it changing, to be honest. I'll probably still binge watch Married at First Sight.
And MJ says, you said before you're a stationery lover. Do you handwrite any parts of your book?
If it's just not working on the screen, I will just try and rewrite that section by hand, because I think it just stops you from seeing the book as seeing what you're writing as if it resembles what's going to appear in the book, and you can be a bit too critical of it. But yeah, I mean, I've got my notebook next to me. I write.
So you write a lot.
I write in here all the time, just thoughts or things I need to remember for later, or figuring things out. So usually I write by hand if I'm figuring things out, right on the screen when I'm actually typing it up. And I try and write in a journal as well, in like a fountain pen. I thought I'd be like one of these cool writers who sort of write longhand with a fountain pen. But
sorry, I just realised my battery's nearly running out, so quickly plugging it back in.
Yeah, so I try and write in a journal every day, but it quite often falls by the wayside.
And I saw you showed before your Postit notes. Are they? Do you have them all around the place?
Yeah, I keep them contained to this notebook, and usually I like color code them. Okay. So like purple's to do with something, green's to do with something else, and then I'll use them in that way, so I can sort of swap them around. But yeah, they in my head there's a color code that sticks, but in reality there's about 5 different color codes, and I can quite often get myself into a right pickle trying to figure out which particular color code I'm working from at any one time.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for joining us. It's been great talking to you. Just want to mention to everybody watching that Abigail's actually going to stay in the group today and going to be doing some posts for us. So look out for some posts. If you've got any books you want to suggest to her or any questions you've got for her, please make sure you do that. And wondering if you want to share now with people how they can keep in touch with you.
Yeah, sure. The thing I'm on mainly is Instagram. So I'm at Abigail E Mann on Instagram. Same on Facebook, although I'm sure you can see the link in the group to my Facebook page, and Twitter. I will say that I'm currently not active on Twitter because I'm on a very tight deadline. But on Instagram I do pop things in the stories, and I'll probably pop back up in about 4 weeks' time when I'm emerging from my editing cave, and I'm most active on there. But I also have a newsletter, actually. That is something that goes out usually every month.
Okay, you'll have to in one of your posts share the link how we can sign up to your newsletter. That would be great.
Yeah, so I'll pop that in the Facebook group too.
Yeah, no, that would be great. Thanks. And thanks to everyone who joined in and watched. We had some really great questions. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
And bye, everybody.
Bye.